This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Welcome to the Fatigue Fixer podcast. Ever wonder why it feels like the entire sisterhood is just so darn exhausted? We're diving deep into everything from those sneaky physical culprits, think iron levels, playing hide and seek, or a moody thyroid, to the mental weights of always being on and that sneaky urge to please everyone. And let's not forget society's oh-so-high bar that we're tirelessly trying to reach. I'm Dr. Sarah Vadeboncoeur, your guide on this energy-finding mission. As a naturopathic doctor with over a decade of experience, I've been piecing together the fatigue puzzle, asking why so many incredible women around me, including my patients, often feel like they're running on empty. So pull up a chair or perhaps pop in your headphones and head out for a walk. Together we'll uncover those hidden, surprising, and sometimes even downright unexpected reasons behind that lingering tiredness. Ready to recharge those batteries? All right, deep breath. Let's jump into today's insightful episode. Welcome back to the Fatigue Fixer. If you've ever felt like your relationship with your significant other was a drain or a strain on your energy, today's episode is for you. When I decided I was going to start this podcast, the first name I wrote down about who I wanted to interview is today's guest, Dr. Tracy Dalgleish. Dr. Tracy Dalgleish is a clinical psychologist, couples therapist, and sought-after relationship expert. She is the founder of Be Connected Digital and the owner of a mental health clinic, Integrated Wellness. She is the author of I Didn't Sign Up for This, and she has one of the best Instagram pages for all things relationships, and you should absolutely go follow her at Dr. Tracy D. Tracy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It is so cool to be able to sit with you on the other side now.
Absolutely. I need to tell you that your book is the one I wish I had had a year and a half ago. Because a year and a half ago, I was literally sitting in my bathtub, and don't try this at home, kids. I was looking up apartments on Kijiji to see how much it was going to cost for me to literally move out of my house. Because that is how deeply unwell I felt in my relationship. And luckily, I had the time, the energy, and the resources to do therapy, which I did for a year. And I had basically given myself a timeline. So when this was all happening, it was all around the time that I was turning 40, which I think for a lot of women is a time where we really look at our lives and think about what's working and what's not. And for me, it was like, what do I want for myself as I move into this next decade? And I really wanted my relationship to look and feel different. And so I told myself, if I'm still unhappy on my 41st birthday, I'm going to leave. I didn't leave. And part of why I didn't leave is that therapy literally saved my relationship. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that in the way that maybe some people might think, because my partner did not participate in therapy. He chose not to do that, which was fine. I respected that. So basically, I made a promise to myself that I was going to do everything within my power and my control to improve my relationship. I wanted to feel like if I end up leaving, I want to feel like I gave it everything that I had. And that's what I want to dive into with you today, because I think so many of us think, if my partner just started doing this, or if they stopped doing that, everything would be better and I would be happier. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned from my therapy experience is that I needed to focus on me, not him. And how I was showing up or not showing up was directly impacting his behaviors towards me. And as soon as I started to shift how I was showing up, magically he did too. And once I started giving what I was hoping to receive, I started to get it in return. And in your book, which is I Didn't Sign Up for This, you refer to this concept of externalization, where we tend to really focus on other people's behaviors instead of our own thoughts and feelings. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what are some of the patterns that you're seeing in your female clients that are really like putting a strain on their energy and their well-being?
I mean, that one right there is the biggest one, which is I'm going to focus all on you, and I'm not going to look at myself and how I am showing up here. And I get it. I get why we do that. I get what people in general tend to do that. I get why women tend to do that. And it is a coping mechanism to keep us feeling safe because it feels really hard to have to look inwards. And for many of us, we're not ready to do that. And I also want to really normalize that experience, Sarah, where so many people enter into therapy. And those early stages, it is a focusing on, or even at the beginning of the session, it's well, let me tell you what he or she or they did that wasn't okay. And then we have to go inwards into ourselves and to do that work. So externalizations, definitely. That's the blaming, criticism. I'm focusing on you. It's you. You're the problem. The other one that immediately pops into my mind is people pleasing. We focus on being the good girl, the good wife, the good partner, the good daughter, the good daughter-in-law, and we put everybody else's needs in front of our own. And we do that for really good reasons. Again, we do that because we are trying to stay safe. And when I say safe, I mean that not in the sense of the physical threat to your safety. And of course, this conversation is for people who are not physically abused, right, sexually abused, right? This is if there's abuse going on, emotional abuse, if there's abuse going on, this is you go and you get help and you leave. But the people pleasing is that pattern within ourselves where we give up what it is that we want to need in the service of somebody else. And that is such an energy drain because over time you will grow to build resentment. You will grow angry. You will not be the best version of yourself. Those are the first two that immediately come to mind. People pleasing, externalization.
Yeah. And I think I just talked a bit about people pleasing in another episode I did. And I think so much of that is learned so early on, right? And especially as little girls, we are socialized and taught that being kind and respectful and helpful and not upsetting people, like those are things that are all deemed to be so good and important. So a lot of this stuff, I think we just like bring these early lessons that we internalize, we bring them into our relationships. And then we wonder why we're so angry and we're so resentful. But that's what I definitely want to unpack resentment. And I do want to talk about anger, because I think resentment, as uncomfortable as it feels when you're feeling it, I think it can be such an opportunity to explore where your needs are not being met. Right? Is that what resentment is telling us? Like, why is resentment there? What is it trying to show us?
It's such an important emotion. And I know so many people view it as a red flag. And I actually view it as a flag that we can deep dive into and learn a lot from. And what's interesting is when I first said to myself, I resent my husband, nobody was using this word. And I even remember sharing it on my social media and in my online communities. And again, nobody was really using it. And it speaks to even the taboo behind this feeling. And yes, it is a toxic emotion. If we don't address it, it will slowly erode at the health of your relationship. And yet it contains so much information. So when we feel these emotions that we are taught, right? So good girls, to please, to perfect, to care for others, we're taught not to feel these more messier emotions, which are things like anger, resentment, frustration. And they hold a lot of information. Resentment often speaks to unmet needs within ourselves. And there are two reasons for this. One is we're not communicating them, or two, we are communicating them and they're not being met. And this one is a little bit tricky because sometimes we communicate them to our partner with the expectation that they should be meeting them. And what we fail to remember, or what our societal messaging is right now around what it means to be in a romantic relationship, is we often have this belief that my partner should be meeting every single one of my needs. And that is not possible in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think there's two things. One is, like you said, we often have this expectation that our partner should just automatically know what we want and what we need. And even if they are super attuned, like, they're not mind readers, right? So I think getting to the habit and the practice of clearly articulating what you want and what you need is so helpful. But then also maybe detaching from the outcome, because you can't control whether or not they're going to meet that need. And I think what you also said is so important, that modern society has put so much emphasis on the nuclear family, and we are expecting to get so many of our needs met from this one person. And especially, I know, like, if you become a mom and you're working, like, life becomes busy. And what we tend to do is we tend to deprioritize friendships and other people that could be meeting some of these needs. So then it puts even more pressure on your significant other to be your best friend and your lover and your confidant and your cheerleader, and like all these things. Is so much pressure on people's relationships.
And not just that, what we end up doing is we then desire our partners to be something different, or someone different than who they actually are. And of course, in relationships, we are growing and evolving together. And yet at the same time, you chose this person for a reason. There was something about this person that drew you to them. I'm thinking of this experience where, and I talk about this in the book, where it's Ashley's story in the book, where she wishes to be like, she struggles with a piece of her husband and wishes to be like that. Or is it that's where the resentment is coming from? I'm mixing up all my stories now with all at the end of the day.
Yes.
But this key piece, though, is that it was this inner desire within herself that she shut down. And how many people can relate to that experience of shutting down what it is that we really want and need? My husband and I were recently talking about my early postpartum experiences. And truly, if I could go back, I wish I had left sooner, in the sense of go to take the paint class, go for the walks, go for that. And the memories that I have are, and it was not because my husband wasn't supportive or encouraging, but it's just because we didn't really know as first-time parents. But he would, and social media in 2015 was not at where it is right now in terms of the parenting landscape. But he would say, why don't you go get groceries by yourself? I'll look after our son. You go do that, take that time to yourself. And initially I'm like, yes, right, okay, groceries by myself. And today I'm outraged by that, because that is not me nurturing, tending to, and caring for my identity. And
no, that's performing a basic family function that someone's got to do.
Right. And I mean, there was no ill intention behind that. It was just from a place of both of us not really understanding some of those implicit messages that we had, and also not understanding that regular need and desire that we even both of us, but particularly me as well, is to tap into our own identities and to look after what it is that we want to need, and to find that in ways through play and creativity. And right, those are important things. And I know that so many women and mothers, they shut that down in the service of other people. Yeah.
That brings us perfectly into this idea of overfunctioning. I am so obsessed with, like, ever since I understood and saw what this looks like, it's something that I'm chatting with my patients about, because I think it's such a big source of our resentment. It's also such a big source of why so many women are drained and exhausted and overwhelmed and frustrated. So can you explain to our audience what is overfunctioning?
Let me put it in the couple dynamic, because this is, I think, a really important one, and it leads us to why we end up into this position. But so to define overfunctioning is the individual who is the problem solver, the caretaker, who makes all of the decisions, who takes the lead on things. And often what we see is that women fall into this role when it comes to navigating childcare, household, relational, emotional tasks. And This pattern then, if you fall into the overfunctioning, it calls for a response from the other person. And the other person then begins to underfunction. And so many heterosexual couples fall into this pattern where she ends up being the overfunctioner and he's the underfunctioner, partly because of the societal and cultural messaging that we have, but also because what we're trying to do is we are trying to navigate a tension of two things that we all experience in our relationships. And this is the tension between trying to be an autonomous and individual self. That's the part of you that your partner was attracted to as well. That's before you met. There was a spark in you. You know, you did the things for you. That's your autonomy. And then the other piece we're trying to navigate is intimacy and connection. And there's this tension between those two because we don't know how to do that. Oftentimes we haven't been modeled how to do that. And so how do we then get into that? One common dynamic is the blame defend. I'm the more critical partner, the angry one. I'm going to tell you the things you're doing wrong. I'm projecting outward. And naturally the other person gets defensive. Or the other common cycle is the overfunctioner, underfunctioner. And the underfunctioner then falls into the trap of saying things like, well, I don't know, what do you think? And then lets the overfunctioner make all of the decisions. The underfunctioner might even be viewed as not capable of completing tasks or being able to make these decisions on their own. The way I describe this with clients in my therapy room is it's like maybe you both started in some way with two equal size balloons in the room. You have one balloon, you are the other balloon. And over time, with that tension, one balloon starts to either shrink or the other one starts to grow. So in my own relationship, I know those early moments where I started to overfunction. They were moments of, again, being that good girl. I wanted to be the good girlfriend. Oh, I wonder if Greg is out of deodorant. I'll pick up some deodorant. Mm-hmm. Fast forward 5 years later, I am the keeper of all of the Shoppers Drug Mart purchases of all of our personal hygiene toiletries, and he doesn't buy face wash, right? Or something like that. Yes. Or the other part is meal planning, or then you become the one grocery shopping, and then we're starting to talk about the mental load here. So then, of course, we also know that women work 90 hours or more between paid and unpaid labor each week, and this includes the visible labor, but also the invisible labor, which is the thinking and planning and conceptualizing all of these tasks. And so in that bubble diagram, then as one partner's bubble gets bigger, the other partner has to naturally respond to that. If you are always making these decisions, your partner starts to think, okay, I guess I don't have to make that decision. If you're always picking up the deodorant, they stop noticing when the deodorant's not there anymore, right? Like it's these like small micro moments. Or even if your partner steps into that underfunctioning role, then the overfunctioner rather naturally takes over. And I really like using this model to understand relationships because it removes the blame as to why so many couples struggle with the mental load or struggle with feeling resentful and not getting their needs met. Most people are not doing this maliciously. It is a cycle that takes over, that becomes the problem.
Yeah. And like you said, I think it starts off very innocently. Like when I talk about this, I use the example of picking up socks, which I think you've shared on your your Instagram too, right? So like it could start as simply as someone in your family is leaving their socks on the ground and you're like, well, I might as well pick them up. Great. Except now when the socks are on the ground again, you're like, okay, I got to pick the socks up again. And the person leaving the socks on the ground learns, well, I don't have to pick up my socks because I know that mom's going to pick up the socks. And so you're basically turning that person into someone who doesn't pick up their socks. And then you get mad because you're like, why am I the only one picking up the socks, right? So it creates this like really interesting dynamic. And I think that's where a lot of resentment starts to bubble up because we're like, why can't anyone pick up their own socks? But the other thing, and I'd love to hear your perspective, is that, and certainly you gave examples of this in the book, a lot of women end up overfunctioning because there's some part of us that either feels the need or likes that level of control. Because the other thing I see with this, and you kind of alluded to it, even if the partner, the underfunctioner, steps up and tries to do something, we are so quick to, and this happens to me all the time with cooking. When my partner is cooking and it's not happening as fast as when I would do it, it takes so much restraint to be like, don't comment, just let him cook the way he's like. Why do we feel the need to nitpick and control? Like, why do we think our way is so much better than everybody else's way?
Let's go to an existential piece here, which is this sense of needing certainty and control. It is our difficulty with sitting in discomfort. And that's at the root of this, is that we get stuck into doing these things because I want to know for certain that this is going to be done and I don't have to think about it again. If I do it my way, then I know it's done properly, and then so that I don't have any kind of discomfort down the road. It's a short-term solution. So in the short term, I don't have to feel any pain, but in the long term, I'm struggling and suffering even more. And we need to come back to this idea that, there is there's no right way to cook, right?
Yeah.
And in relationships, there are two people and you are supposed to be different. And at times, even appreciating or acknowledging our differences like we did early on in the relationship, that can help to alleviate some of that distress there. But it really, I think it comes back to us needing to have certainty in our life and to know that something is going to happen, and then to not be sideswiped, or it's that sense of perfecting. When I know that this is going to happen a certain way, then I'm okay. And it becomes attached to our sense of worthiness and our sense of enoughness, which is much deeper than on the surface when you're watching the cooking, right?
Right. It's not about how quickly he chops the peppers. It's, it's more than that. I also think that because for a lot of women, there's so many things probably do feel overwhelming and out of control, that this is probably one place where it feels safe to exert some of that control. So we're probably just like holding on for dear life because it's one place where we can safely do that.
Which then asks for us to sit down into that uncertainty within our lives and to acknowledge that, maybe this isn't really about how fast or how many pans my husband is using to cook the dinner, but maybe there's actually something else that I'm really struggling with. Holidays are coming up. Okay, I know I have to have these family conversations, and there's actually a lot of anxiety around that and not wanting to have those conversations. So, or maybe it's the, last night I had shared something really hard and he didn't acknowledge me and he stayed on his phone, and now here I am looking at him cooking and I'm just so angry of how he's approaching this. So oftentimes there's something much deeper.
And you talk about this in the book, that like when you're fighting about the same things, whether it's money or sex or cooking or dishes, like that, it's not about that thing. And that's one things I learned in my therapy experience. I'm like, it's not about the thing that we are arguing about. It's usually something so much deeper than that.
I also think so many women struggle to clearly express what it is that they want and need. And again, this comes back to our conditioning, that we shouldn't have to ask for it, that our partner should just know that if we ask, then we're needy or we're being a burden. And yet at the same time, then I think of so many women who have desires and don't get it met, who want something, desires, it could be something like being able to connect with your partner in a certain way and going on a date night and feeling special. Or it could even be wanting sex in a certain way or something you desire in that sense, or just the putting our phones down and having a conversation without being distracted. But if we don't ask for it, we're not going to get it met.
Yeah. So if there's someone listening and they're resonating with a lot of this, like, how do you get people that you're working with in your practice to start to articulate some of these needs and wants? Like, is it just as simple as like telling and asking? Like, are there any ways that you encourage people to start to do this?
Yeah, start small, because this is not a big overhaul. And I remind people that you and your partner have been in a cycle for a long time. And maybe you've just recently noticed that it's creating problems in the past year or two. Maybe 3 years or longer, but there are patterns of engaging and communicating that were there early on. So for this then to start recognizing what you need, start really small. And Sarah, I'm going to say even smaller than what you think. So as you're listening right here, ask yourself, do I need to use the washroom? How full is my bladder? How's my stomach right now? Am I feeling hungry? Where's my jaw? And what we're talking about here, which is so important, and some of our kids are starting to learn this in school. So school systems are starting to do this. We're teaching interoception,
Yes.
which is the ability to go inwards and to tune into our bodily sensations and to listen to them, to be aware of them, and to use them to guide us with what we need and want. And so it is the simplest thing. And you're going to notice as you listen, I didn't say anything about your partner.
Mm-hmm.
This is about you.
Yep.
Right. And
goes back to how we started it.
Absolutely.
Start with you. And I know I have a friend in particular who I'm thinking of right now, because every time we talk about relationships, she kind of has this why is this another thing that I have to manage, right? I'm already managing it. Why is this another thing I have to take on? And I totally get that response. But I really feel like if you really want to create a shift in your relationship, it does require that you become willing to look at yourself, to turn inward, to sit in the discomfort of realizing that you are a part of this dynamic, that you're a willing participant, and that by looking at your own behaviors and how you're interacting with your partner, it's incredible how just changing your behavior can start to really shift that dynamic.
A lot of people will say, well, my partner gets angry, or they shut me down, or I brought it up once, but then nothing changed. And I remind people, it's not enough to bring it up once. It is an ongoing conversation, because you didn't get here by just one interaction. It's an ongoing conversation. It's about identifying that boundary and what's important to you. And a great example was I gave over the task specifically, because again, I completely appreciate that. I know the weight of the mental load, and with 2 children, with running a business with my partner. And I decided at one point I was going to give over the daycare contact and the school contact to my husband. And it was easy for me to be in my own anxiety and discomfort and interfere with him doing that. I would ask questions. I would say, hey, don't forget to pack did you get the shirt for that day? And now, several years later, I'm at the point where I'm good at not opening the emails even. Maybe enough to be involved in what, the weekly summary of what the kids are doing in class, but to the point where I am no longer trying to micromanage him. And that requires also a partner stepping up and allowing them to make mistakes. Have we missed color shirt day a few times? Yeah, absolutely. Have maybe lunches not included the food that I would like to put in there? 100%. And at the same time, my resentment started to ease up by stepping away from the lunch task and the school task.
Yeah. And I think this is so important, because it is about choosing your brand of discomfort, if you will, because you can either choose to overfunction and have everything perfect as you would want it, but the price you're paying is probably resentment and overwhelm and fatigue. Option number 2 is you can start to release some of these tasks. You're going to have what I call the messy middle, which is where you're stopping to do the thing. They're not picking up the slack yet. Everyone's going to be a little bit frustrated, but you have to get through that in order to get to the other side, which is where you can start to actually release that task. And yes, there's probably going to be some discomfort of did they do it? Did they do it but either way, you're going to have some discomfort. It's choosing if you're willing to release that. To also, it just opens up energy and mental space for other things. Because one of the things that drives me so much is that women are incredible. And I think we have so much power and wisdom to share. And so many of us can't do that right now because of the load that we carry just trying to keep our families functioning on a day-to-day basis. And that's what excites me, is that if you stop picking up the socks, or you stop being the one who plans and cooks all the meals, where else could you deploy that time and that energy that would probably bring you so much more joy and fulfillment and happiness than having a perfectly clean kitchen or like no socks on the floor?
You have to unhook yourself from those stories that keep repeating of, right? And that is that piece where you notice the thing, okay, counters are not cleared off. And then you feel the anxiety, you feel a tightness in your body, and you go and do the thing. And inside somewhere, it's like, okay, good. I did this. It feels better. There's a whole connection between thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations, and the behaviors that we do. And we have to start breaking that down. And there's a mess. I love how you said that there is a messy middle, but we need to unhook from emotions and thoughts because they're going to be there. They tell us stories. But if we were able to instead ask ourselves, what do I need right now? What's more important to me? Or what is something I can do that's connected to what's meaningful? The outcome might be different.
Yeah. I also think that when you learn to sit in the discomfort of those uncomfortable emotions, you realize they don't actually last that long. If you give them the space to actually be felt instead of what most of us do, which is try to suppress them and get rid of them and numb them and drink and Instagram them away, they last longer because they're not actually being metabolized. And then they literally I believe they sit in your body. Like they're causing dis-ease when you're actively trying to suppress what your emotions are trying to be felt.
Yeah. And that is also a plug for your episode 2. So for anyone who hasn't listened, go back to episode 2. But
yes, thank you.
But there's something really important here. And that is that I commonly hear from women, I don't want to say this to my partner because I don't want them to be upset. And that is you giving up yourself in the service of trying to control them and their emotions. And instead, what is more powerful is saying, I'm going to get uncomfortable and I'm going to try this. And of course, trying it again, this is kind of where we need the skills and tools. And that's exactly what I deeper dive inside Be Connected, my online program. The book is a great place to start if that's where you're ready. But those skills and tools then are going to your partner and saying, I'm going to give you feedback. Here's how we give feedback. Here are the words that we can use to do that. And here's the follow-up. And when they get angry, because if they have in the past, they might again, then you prepare yourself for that. We can only control our side and how we communicate, and then also how we respond to what is predictable. People are predictable. We know what their behavior will be, right? They might change and surprise you, which is fantastic. But I think what you said there is, 1, we avoid the discomfort. 2, we suppress and hope it goes away. 3, it doesn't. It comes back in other ways.
And it comes back with the fire of 1,000 suns. And the way that I see this is anger.
Yes.
So many women, especially, there's something happening when we turn 40 in and around there. There's some kind of I think it's an awakening or something. But I actually get excited when a woman gets angry because I'm like, you're waking up. You're starting to actually notice that something is not working. So instead of feeling like there's something wrong with you for being angry, can we explore what's driving that anger? So part of what you talk about in the book is that anger can be a primary emotion where it legitimately is anger and it needs to be expressed. But often that it's actually a secondary emotion. And what you say is that anger is there to protect us from more vulnerable feelings like sadness or loss. Can we talk about anger? What is anger trying to do for us? Why is it showing up?
It often shows up when things don't feel right for us or when we feel wronged or something is unjust. And because of our societal messaging and our upbringings, we think that anger is bad. Oh no, you're angry. Don't be the angry bee and all of those bad words that we call ourselves and suppress it. And whether it's a secondary emotion or a primary emotion, what you can do is you can ask yourself and just slow it down as soon as anger shows up. First, get to know what it feels like in your body. Is it, the increased heart rate? Is it short of breath? Is it the tenseness, like the tense feeling in your jaw? Are your shoulders up around your ear? Are you clenching your fist? Like what's happening in your body when you're angry? So you can bring this awareness to that. But then you slow it down and you ask yourself, what is this about for me? What is this signaling to me? And there are a bunch of different ways we can do that. We can go into the body and listen to more of the bodily sensations. We can ask ourselves what images or thoughts come up. What do we need? What is this telling us? But it's about slowing down and actually listening to what shows up then. So it is, and then the anger then leads us to do all of these things, which is the overfunctioning. Okay, well, just keep doing these things. Or we flex our boundaries. We please others, but we don't ever allow ourselves to feel angry. So anger is not a bad thing, but we don't want to go around venting it because that's not helpful. But we do need to find a way to work with it in a healthy way, which is, what is this telling me?
Mm-hmm. And I think this circles back to what you said earlier around interoception, right? If you aren't paying attention to your body's most basic bodily functions, like my bladder is full, I need to pee, I'm thirsty, I need a glass of water. If we are ignoring those things, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to start to notice some of the bigger things when they show up, right? If you're not listening to your bladder when you need to pee, it's going to be really hard to listen to the anger when it shows up and to try to understand what it's there to tell you. So I get like kind of excited when anger shows up because I really do think that it is the body's way of saying, not this, right? It's trying to redirect you away from something. And if you can start to pay attention and see what some of those things might be, I think it can be a very helpful emotion, because we have this like weird thing that there's like good emotions like happiness and joy and love. Oh, those are so great. But like anger, bad, sadness, bad, grief, bad. They're not good or bad. They're just some are trying to guide you towards something, and some are probably trying to tell you maybe that's not working so well for you.
There's one of my favorite moments as a therapist when I'm sitting across from clients, and that is when a client comes in and they're really struggling with what is happening. And when we can get to the core of it and I can label it for them and reflect back and say, oh, I think this is grief, or, oh, I think this is resentment, or, this sounds like anger. And then it's almost this like, you see my clients, I see them almost be like, oh, yes, yeah, that's what it is. And Susan Davis talks about this, is that when we can label our emotions, it is like we're no longer bobbing out to sea, lost against the waves crashing against us. Someone's given us a life raft. And so then we can find our way back. But we have to be able to feel anchored with something to help us, which is why naming it is so important. And if we're completely not in tune with it, then again, we're going to have other manifestations of that emotion.
Yeah. And it's going to come out. That's the other thing. Like anger is not going to just hide and go quietly away. It's going to show up when your kid's not putting on their pajama and you lose your shit. It's going to show up when you're PMSing and all of a sudden, like the sound of your partner chewing is making your head explode. Like it's going to show up. So we would be so much better off if we tried to acknowledge it at the time that we felt it, as opposed to like suppressing it, trying to get rid of it, and then it's going to come back. And it's usually when it comes out that way, it's usually causing way more damage than if we had just said something at the moment, at the time. You know, I would really appreciate if you did this. I would appreciate if you didn't do that.
Or not even, it could even be something like, oh, you just looked away from me. Did I, that hurt a bit. Did I say something wrong? Or are you having a reaction to what I'm saying? Like even those like small moments that we let build and build and build, that could be opportunities for curiosity and for exploration together to build an understanding. We spend a lot of time trying to perceive the world around us. And it makes sense, right? Because it makes it easier for us. So we're always receiving signals from inside of our minds, so internally and externally, things outside of us, but then also between us. So you and I are having messages go back and forth through our whole time together. You're nodding, which is telling me I'm safe here. We're connecting. Those are nervous systems connecting. But if moments throughout the day, I hear my partner huff around the home, then my nervous system is like, ooh, is there something wrong here? Is there something wrong here? And if I don't check in, use my curiosity, use my questioning, my desire to understand his internal experience, then at one other point, I'm going to yell and be like, why can't you just pick up your socks? But Is that really what it's about? Yeah.
Not usually. I think what you said too makes me think of part of what I really noticed through the therapy that I did is that I was being so deeply impacted by my partner's mood. Mm-hmm. And so I would like come in, and this is like the visual that came to mind. Like I have this like inner flame, and I felt like sometimes I would like walk into the room and the flame would just get extinguished immediately because I was letting his mood and his kind of how he was feeling, I totally was taking that on. And then I made it personal, right? If he's not happy or he's quiet, it's somehow something to do with me, as opposed to he's just a quiet person. It's not that he's unhappy or that I did anything wrong. This is just how he is. And instead of trying to like cheer him up and get him to like do all these things that how I like to express myself, can I just accept and honor that that is how he shows up and that I can respect that? And one of the phrases that I think you repeated many times in your book is this idea, I think, tell me if I'm getting it right. I am me, you are you, and we are both okay.
Which is at the core of the book. This is the practice of interdependence, which is what I teach in the book as this core, which is trying to balance both independence and autonomy and intimacy and connection. Because what we tend to do is we tend to swing too far into independence, and we'll say things like, well, fine, those are your feelings and I'm not going to deal with it. And you go work that out on yourself. I'm not responsible for that. But that loses the connection. That loses the intimacy and the ability to be close and to work things through together. I'm so glad you brought that up because I know so many people can relate to that, and something that Greg and I also had to navigate in our own relationship. Because also too, let's think about where we experienced our understanding of relationships early on, which were often comments like, you're making mommy mad, or go hug grandma, you have to hug her even if you don't want to, right? Like all of those messages that said that you are responsible for someone else's feelings. We really need to practice depersonalizing and creating a sense of separation.
Yeah. And I think also just working to make sure that we give ourselves what we need, right? Again, it goes back to this, like the pressure we put on our significant others to provide and fill and give us all the things we need. It's such an unrealistic expectation. It's like we're setting ourselves up for conflict. So how can you provide yourself what you need so that when you're showing up in that relationship, you're not like desperate or, grasping for something, because you've actually given it to yourself and you can both maybe show up more fully. Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. I know our listeners probably learned so much, and I think relationships are so important. And part of why I wanted to have this conversation is that I think our relationships can be either this like deep well of like safety and energy and comfort, or they can be a place where we really feel like drained, disconnected, and unfulfilled. So if you desire more connection in your relationship with your significant other, I highly, highly recommend Dr. Tracy's book. Again, it's called I Didn't Sign Up for This. And please go follow her on Instagram. It's so good. And you can also find more information about her group program, Be Connected, which I think is such an amazing resource for people and or couples who really want to have a stronger connection. Any last words that you want to leave our listeners with today, Dr. Tracy?
I think that question is really asking yourself, what is it that is important to me? What's meaningful to me? And just listening to that without the layers of, is that okay? Or I shoulds, or the guilt, or the fears of being a burden.
Or feeling selfish. What is with this selfish thing?
Oh, yes. I know.
We'll do a whole other episode on selfish.
We'll come back to that one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you back here in a couple weeks. Thanks for spending your precious time with me today. Remember, it takes a village or a podcast community to really make a dent in this fatigue epidemic. If today's episode resonated with you, do me a favor. Share it with a friend or two, and if you have a second, drop us that shiny 5-star review. It means so much to me. Are you eager to solve your own personal energy puzzle? Hop on over to fatiguefixer.ca/quiz and check out my fatigue fingerprint quiz. Let's pinpoint what's standing between you and feeling your best. A big thank you to Jen Hudson and Drew Gardner over at Story Studio Network for bringing these conversations to life. And hey, just so you know, I've got your back. Your fatigue, it's super real, and it's definitely not just all in your mind. I see you and I believe you. Every 2 weeks, we'll keep these heart-to-hearts going, learning together and cheering each other on. Because between you and me, accepting perpetual exhaustion as the norm, that's not going to fly around here. See you back here in 2 weeks. Bye!